Today, we are digging into the ideas from the book Tokenomics 101 because we're going to get to the bottom of what really gives digital assets their value. We're going to break down all the core lessons from this book, one slide at a time. So let's just start with the biggest question of them all, right? What in the world actually gives a digital token its value? I mean, think about it. It's not paper, it's not backed by a government, so where does the value come from? That is the mystery we're going to solve today. And here's our game plan for how we're going to do it. First, we'll nail down exactly what tokenomics is. Then, we'll get into the two biggest forces at play, supply and demand. After that, we're going to look at this really cool mechanism called token burns, talk about how to build real, sustainable value. And finally, and this is super important, we'll cover how to spot the red flags so you can protect yourself. All right, first up, let's tackle the big one. What is tokenomics? The best way to think about it is as the blueprint, the entire architectural plan that determines a digital asset's value from the very beginning. The name itself is actually pretty simple. It's just a mashup of token and economics. But what it really means is the entire economic rulebook for a cryptocurrency. It lays out everything, how a token is born, how it gets into people's hands, and what will ultimately give it any value. So a solid tokenomics model has to answer some really critical questions. Like, how many of these tokens will ever exist? Is there a limit? How are new ones made? Or, and this is just as important, how are they taken out of the system? What's the reason for anyone to actually hold on to it or use it? And what's the safety net to keep the whole thing from crashing? This is literally the DNA of a crypto project. And let's use a real-world example to make this sink in. Bitcoin. It's the perfect case study. Its tokenomics state flat out, there will only ever be 21 million coins. That's it, never more. This hard limit creates scarcity, and that scarcity is a huge driver of its value. It's exactly why people call it digital gold, because it follows the same basic economic principle. When something is rare, it's valuable. Okay, so now we know what tokenomics is. Let's dig into how it actually works. And that brings us to the two most fundamental forces in all of economics, supply and demand. These two levers are the engine that drives the price of pretty much everything. Now, when we talk about supply in crypto, you've basically got two main flavors. On one side, you have a fixed supply, like Bitcoin. There's a hard cap, which makes it scarce by design. On the other side, you have an inflationary supply. This is where new tokens are continuously created, usually as a way to reward the people who are helping to run and secure the network. Neither one is automatically better, they just have very different goals. So that's the supply side. But you can have the best supply model in the world and it means nothing if nobody wants the token. So what drives demand? Well, it's a mix of things that all feed into each other. It has to start with utility. What does this thing actually do? What problem does it solve? If it has strong utility, that can lead to adoption. And as more people use it, the project gains credibility. It all works together to create this magnetic pole that draws in value. And you know, this right here is such a critical distinction to understand about demand. There's demand from speculation. That's the hype, the emotion-driven buying, the short-term stuff. And then there's demand from real utility. That's value-driven, it's long-term, and it's based on people actually using the token for its intended purpose. For any project to survive, it has to eventually shift from being all about speculation to being grounded in real utility. All right, now for something really interesting. Let's zoom in on a specific and pretty powerful tool that projects use to manage their economy. We're talking about the power of burns. And it sounds kind of crazy, but it's all about creating value by destroying it. So what exactly is a token burn? It's when a project takes a certain number of its tokens and permanently, and I mean permanently, removes them from circulation. They get sent to what's called a burn address, which is basically a black hole. It's a wallet that nobody has the keys to, so once tokens go in, they can never ever come out. They're just gone. A really common way this happens is through a model called buy, back, and burn. It's a pretty smart process. First, the project earns revenue from its operations. Then, it uses that money to go onto the open market and buy its own tokens back. That in itself creates buying pressure. And then, for the final step, they send all those tokens they just bought straight to the burn address, reducing the total supply. It's a 1-2 punch that hits both supply and demand. And what's the effect of all this? Well, token burns create this trifecta of positive pressure. First, you're obviously increasing scarcity by lowering the supply, making every remaining token a little bit rarer. This often boosts demand because investors see the supply shrinking. And finally, it's a huge signal of confidence. It shows the team is reinvesting in its own ecosystem, which can really boost investor morale. Okay, so we've looked at the individual parts: supply, demand, burns. Now let's zoom back out and put it all together. How do these pieces combine to build sustainable value? I'm talking about projects that are built to last. It all comes down to balancing the economic equation. You see, the best projects, the ones that are truly sustainable, they have a few things in common. They control their supply growth so it doesn't get out of hand. They have a strong, real-world use case, that's the bedrock. They make sure everyone's incentives are aligned: the users, the developers, the investors, so everyone wins when the project succeeds. And they use tools like strategic burns and something called vesting, which is just a gradual release of tokens, to build trust and show they're in it for the long haul. And this quote from the book just nails it perfectly. The best token economies are not purely inflationary or deflationary. They are balanced. The goal isn't to be the most deflationary project or the one with the highest rewards. The goal is to find that sweet spot, that perfect sustainable balance between all these economic forces. That's the secret sauce. And that brings us to our last and maybe the most important section. Now that you know what good tokenomics looks like, how do you spot the bad stuff? This is all about spotting the red flags to help you protect your investment. So here's a quick checklist of things to watch out for. First, totally unrealistic promises. If you see 100x guaranteed, run. Another big one is a lack of clear utility. If you can't figure out what the project actually does, that's a problem. Be wary of vague or anonymous teams. And this is a big one: check the token distribution. If you see that just a handful of wallets own most of the tokens, that creates a huge risk of price manipulation. And this last quote really drives the point home. A weak tokenomic structure is a ticking time bomb, regardless of hype. A project can have the best marketing in the world, it can have tons of influencers talking about it, but if the underlying economics are broken, it is built to fail. The fundamentals always win in the end. So, we'll wrap up with this final question for you to think about. When you look at a project, are you investing based on knowledge or are you investing based on emotion? Understanding the principles we've just walked through, that is the difference between making a truly informed decision and just chasing hype. I'd say always choose knowledge.